Linda.
Hi, Omar.
What is this week's practice?
Well, I'm so excited to have Charlie Koch as our guest today to do a live practice. And this is actually the first time we've had someone we've quoted on the podcast as a testimonial now show up live for our podcast practice. So,
Welcome, Charlie.
yes.
Thank you. Really good to be here. As both of you know, I'm a huge fan of everything you're doing. So it's really great to be here. And thanks for having me.
Well, this is what we hope for, is a growing gratitude ecosystem. So we appreciate you listening. We appreciated you sending in your note, just letting us know how the podcast has been helping you in your life, and now welcoming you to the show.
Yeah, it's amazing to be here. Thanks.
Charlie, I would love to start with you just sharing your story of how you found the podcast, because it's such an interesting point in your life, how you found us and the role that gratitude blooming is playing right now in this part of your life, in this cycle. Please share.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So this time, about a year ago, I found myself in quite a transitional phase. I turned 40. Quit drinking, moved from Seattle, a big city, to a smallish town called Bellingham. And like many others in this time, lost my job all within a few months. So found myself in a very interesting transitional period. And so, really learned a lot through the course of the last several months as I've been sort of navigating this. And it started with kind of reframing the transitional period from something that was happening to me to something that was happening first, and then something that was happening for me later through a lot of work that sort of I've been doing. It started out by really sort of giving myself time to kind of process the transition and all of the change. And, there's a lot of emotions that happen with these transitions. And so it felt, quite a bit. It was a lot all at once. And so did a couple of things. I think one was strengthening my mindfulness practice. So really leaning into meditation and mindfulness, but also found gratitude and found, some research that I know that you all have talked about in the past that's out there about the power of gratitude, and happened upon the podcast just in searching for practice and content, and sort of found gratitude blooming that way. And really from there, I've sort of built, your practice and my own out of all the great lessons you guys have shared, to the point where, it's part of our family's weekly meeting every week, where we talk about the card deck and we pull a card, and my kids are 6 and 8. So, we have a little bit of explaining to do on some of the themes, but, it's actually pretty great to sort of hear them ask questions and be curious about what these themes mean, and, make it a part of our week. So that's sort of the story of how I got involved with y'all and sort of built the practice of gratitude into my life.
I really appreciate that framing of these things happening to me, to really, these things are happening for me. And, and it's just like we're moving from kind of this passive life is happening, and to really like, no, we have a role, and we can kind of disrupt that brain's biological bias to focus on the negative. And then I love it that you then create it as a social practice, right? This is what I've always loved about gratitude as a social emotion, is that it's not just about you. And so when you can find practices, whether it's family or friends, or, just being part of the Gratitude Blooming podcast community, is like, all of a sudden you realize you're not alone. And when you can have these practices, it's like, okay, yeah, this is possible. This is all for me.
Yeah, it's like buy one, get one free, right? Like you get something for yourself, get something for somebody else. And, I love that you, it did something for you, and then you brought it as a family ritual. And I'd be curious, what was the latest theme that showed up for your family recently.
Yeah, it was infinite possibility card number 27. So the delphinium. So possibility is a great word to describe, this moment of transition. Sort of, I'm kind of right in between this place of like, had my old job and old career and starting a new one in a week and a half. And so it's kind of a lot of things are possible as I sort of look towards the future. So yeah, it was a great one. Another one that took a little bit of, for the 6-year-old, a little bit of what does that mean? What does infinite mean? Which led us down a pretty interesting but great conversation. So yeah, it was great.
Any takeaway of how you explain infinite to a 6-year-old?
Oh man, I wish I could like eloquently put it, but yeah, it was a lot of sort of no ending, it's sort of flowing. I've been really kind of obsessed with this river metaphor lately, and sort of flowing and letting go, and I use that metaphor to talk about kind of the flowing of time and the flowing of, or sort of the infinite possibility that exists. So.
But I think when you were looking for podcasts to help ground you in that initial moment of transition, I think you mentioned to us offline that it was really the nature element that spoke to you. And, and I feel like how we ground even gratitude in a way that doesn't feel sort of like, oh, everything is hunky-dory and fine and everything is awesome. Like, no, like, well, how do we ground these practices? And so I really appreciated that the nature element spoke to you.
Yeah, for sure. I've always been sort of deeply connected and deeply rooted in nature. I spent a large part of my career working in that space to help protect the outdoors for all to enjoy. And, that's where I sort of get my peace, and have sort of built gratitude into that practice. Actually, every morning, go for a walk outside with the dog, and practice gratitude, listen to the podcast, and sort of explore the themes through that walk. But yeah, being outside and in nature also, there's obviously a lot of research as well showing that being in nature can have really positive both mental and physical benefits. So it's like gratitude plus nature is like a magical combo of awesomeness for your health, and I found that to be true for sure.
Yes, for magical combinations for our health. We need more of that.
And I love, Charlie, that you and I actually got to spend time in Mount Shasta together. Yeah. Not only did you find the breadcrumb of gratitude blooming through the podcast, but then you heard about the retreat center in Mount Shasta, and we got to spend time together with the card deck in each of these like meditation spots on the land. So I just love that, like, you're kind of our superstar gratitude blooming super pollinator.
Yeah.
Gratitude blooming Hestia.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. Well, you've got yourself a sober, middle-aged, unemployed belling hamster as your biggest fan. I'm not sure if that's
perfect
or not.
Perfect. That's our demographic.
Well, Charlie, I know that transition has been a big part of this phase of your life. And it is interesting how people find us at the right time of their life where they're really like ready for, what has nature got to tell me about change? And so I'd love for you to take a moment and share, for listeners who are going through a transition right now, what have you learned about transition, like navigating that gnarly time of being in the unknown, and maybe for in this moment of your transition, not yet starting that job, is there an intention or inquiry that you have that we can use as an anchor for our life practice today?
Yeah, for sure. I've learned a lot, during this time. I've really used it to sort of go inward and spend it really trying to sort of better myself and create a new path forward. And first thing I would suggest is just don't miss that opportunity. When the universe is sort of telling you to rethink and talk, and go inward and sort of learn what it is you want to be doing next, don't miss that chance. And that's something that, I certainly feel really good about having done is sort of taking advantage of this time, which at first can seem like, again, this horrible thing that's happening to you. You've lost your job, and there's a ton of emotion that goes along with that. And I, know just from the communities that I'm a part of, a lot of people are feeling it. There's grief involved in all the steps that go along with it. You've lost you've lost something. And in many cases, it's not just one thing, but many things. It's your job, it's your purpose, your mission, your partners, your friends, your collaborators. And so the first
Your
thing
income.
I would just say is don't miss, or don't like shut that down. Like let yourself kind of go through that and feel it, because it's real. But it can be really sort of turbulent at times. And again, to kind of bring this metaphor of a river back, it's like, Belinda, when I was on the land, that was not a creek, that was a river. I mean, it was moving, and there's a lot of energy and water flowing through there, and it can feel a bit violent at times, to have so much water coming through, and in this case, emotion coming through. But there's also an entire industry called whitewater rafting that's built on the idea of like, having that be an exciting thing, not a, terrifying thing. And so, I think what I did was sort of, to continue this metaphor, like figure out how to build a raft, let go, and start to enjoy the ride, of this time of transition, which, is again, something I'm really grateful for. But that, that's not a light switch. That's not something you can just flip and all of a sudden, it happens. It's something that comes through work and practice. And like I said, mindfulness work and gratitude practice, is a really big part of that. And then, when it comes to sort of moving forward, I think, understanding what's important to you, like really using the space to sort of figure out what those principles and key values are that can then kind of point you down the river, when you start to reach a fork in the river, how do you know which way to turn? And it sort of starts to me with what's really important to you. And for me, that's my family. It's the connection to nature, it's community around me, and really having those sort of core principles and values to kind of guide the way is, I think, where you need to get to, but it's not, you can't go right to it. The path does not go straight to being able to have the space to kind of identify what's important to you and sort of have that guide you. You got to go through some work to get there, is sort of my experience with it.
So is there an intention that you'd like to share before we pull a card? You said you've got your job starting soon. And so yet another kind of moment of transition. Now kind of knowing everything that you've been through over the last year, what seed would you like to plant, as an intention for this next phase?
Yeah, I would say finding a way, and sort of what I've just described is being sort of more comfortable with the unknown and excited about the possibilities to come. So living in that space where you don't know the answer. The analogy I sort of use is like we're in a swamp a little bit. Like you got to find your way out of the swamp. There's no clear path. And so finding a way to be more comfortable sort of wading through that swamp, and hopeful that there's something on the other side that's really exciting.
The swampy unknown. I think that might be the title of the podcast.
I love that. And I love how you're not jumping to, clarity and just like hanging on to that. Like, even though there is a job coming for you, you're still kind of, the intention is still like, how do I still be in that place of like, okay with not knowing how it's going to go, which I think is really beautiful. Like so often, you kind of you're waiting to get to the next thing and like, that's it, you're there. But you're saying, hey, like the next thing is still kind of unknown and how it's going to unfold, and let me be okay with that.
The river keeps flowing, even if there is a quote, something certain like a job. And, and I think this is the funny part, right? Is that we actually all know what the end is, right? Like we all die, right? Like, there's maybe some questions people have after what happens next, but like, there is general agreement that we die. And like, so, but until then, it's actually all unknown. And so I agree. I'm just affirming that like reminder, like, okay, just because we have like something that we feel is certain, like a job or a family or a relationship or whatever that thing is for you, I think staying in that place of movement is beautiful. And I can't wait to see what card you pick.
Yeah.
So Charlie, might be a new look at the cards. They're scrambled and not in any particular order. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns and 7 rows. So I'll just move down, or you can give me a number. Just tell me
Number
when.
2 on row 2 is the one that stood out to me.
And so part of
Okay.
you noticing you're looking at the back of the cards, and partly why we look at the back of the cards is that it invites randomness, right? Like our
Right.
brain isn't sort of circulating answers already. So let's see how handling the swampy unknown looks like with the gradual booming card. Ooh, number 9, Rose, representing the theme of vulnerability. It takes courage to be vulnerable. How can you show vulnerability to others? What can bloom from those connections? So before answering the prompt, just looking at the art itself, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, a rose is such a like well-known flower, and so it brings back a lot of memories and thoughts right away. But the first thing that I notice is the petals falling. It's such a, again, sort of well-known metaphor of like the changing of time, when the petals fall. And so that's the first thing I'm drawn to, is this beautiful flower, but its petals are falling, and change is real in this card. And then, the second thing I notice is the small text that says "all shall be well," which to me brings a real positivity, like we were talking about, sort of being comfortable in sort of the possibility and the unknown, but being also vulnerable and courageous through that process.
And so now as you look at the theme and the prompt, particularly as it relates to your intention of like how to be present to the swampy unknown, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I think another word that's sort of coming up for me is humility. And I think those two words are sort of related, at least in my mind, of going into sort of the unknown with an open mind and an open heart, and feeling able to sort of withstand whatever might come your way, and whatever you might find down the river. Sort of bringing vulnerability, but also humility into that moment, I think, is the place to sort of help both not let whatever that might be consume you, either way, if it's negative or positive, and just accepting it for what it is, and that it's another spot down the river to sort of appreciate and enjoy. Sort of what comes to mind for me.
I'm struck too by how transitional moments or new beginnings or endings can be so vulnerable. It's like, oh, I'm so like trying to brace myself for what's next. And I'm really struck in the prompt by the word courage. Like it does take courage to put myself out there, and especially in a new environment and in a new context, a new transition, a new community. So I really feel that part of it too. It's like so tender, and it's like, for me looking at it, it's like a reminder to not harden as a way to protect already, like be defensive, but to like soften into that tenderness, which is really kind of beautiful about this rose too.
And there's something again about the leaves falling, like it's, in transitions, you have to give up a part of yourself a little bit too, which is what I was talking about before. Like, there is some letting go that takes place in these transitions. And so, one of my sort of favorite quotes as of late is this: let go or be dragged. And it's sort of like some of this sort of going into this unknown is letting go and sort of flowing with it versus resisting it. And there's a little part of this sort of rose that speaks to me there about sort of transitions and having to let go.
What I also appreciate about your metaphor of a river is when in rafting is you have these moments where you put in and you take out, right? Like the put ins is like, where do you enter the river and where do you take out? Like, where do you sort of take a step out? And I think having, and I look at the word vulnerability, and in the word is ability, right? It's something that you can strengthen, right? And I think because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know how to be vulnerable. I don't know, like, what is that, like, authenticity sort of mean? And it's just like, it's a muscle. It's something that we can kind of grow. And like, how do we put ourselves in spaces to strengthen that ability, right? And I feel like, so hey, maybe you're not going to ride the whole, the whole river. You're just going to ride a segment, and just like for this hour, I'm going to practice being vulnerable. For this day, I'm going to practice being vulnerable. For this week, I'm going to practice. And like, where are those moments where we can go into a space and kind of really intentionally, because we all need comfort. We all need security as well. And so finding those moments where we feel comfortable enough that like, okay, I can tackle this rapid with a little joy, right? Like, it's okay. I know there's going to be some rapids. That's part of this ride, but I'm going to tackle like this section today and give myself that kind of freedom, really.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie, for putting yourself out there. Like, I'm really struck by how you emailed us out of the blue to let us know, where you were in your life and how we were, connecting with you, what was going on for you without even knowing it. And just putting yourself out there in all of those ways during this transition. I've learned a lot just from watching how you've been navigating it and finding new connections, just like in this prompt.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you. Yeah, it feels a little bit like the vulnerability card is sort of staring right back at me when you say that. Like, it does take, in order to put yourself out there, it does take, a level of vulnerability. And yeah, I mean, just so grateful for everything you guys are doing, and really resonated with me. And I think for those who are going through similar transitional moments, like, really hope that they, can kind of hear what you guys are saying and the messages, and really sort of dive into these themes and build their own practice. Because I feel like, again, these moments of transition can be so powerful, I think. And it can be really easy to be sort of consumed, I think, by all the sort of emotions, and all of the river, or all of the water going down the river can be overwhelming. And gratitude is a great way, in my mind, or has been a really important way to sort of build that raft, and like start to let go and float, and sort of enjoy the unknown. So thank you for what you guys are doing, and the role you've played in sort of this transitional moment for me.
Well, I love this, a raft of gratitude across the swamp of the unknown.
It's going to be a lovely title. Omar's been taking notes on this whole conversation. So, well, thank you so much, Charlie. We can't wait to hear how your journey unfolds. I know we will be in touch, and I'm excited that people can be inspired by your journey through transition.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
All right. Wishing you well.
Wishing you well. Cheers.
See you.